go first. We're so excited to have you speak
Well,
today.
I hope I hope I'm up to it.
Oh, I'm sure you
Yeah.
will. Teresa was sad that she had to miss it, but
Hope that it works. And,
I think it'll be great.
well, I do have lots of little stories to
Yeah,
tell.
everyone's really excited about it.
Some are funny, some are sad,
Yeah.
some are not important, but interesting, you know,
Yeah.
or at least two. And
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to another one of our Thursday Parlays. So first, I want to start out by thanking Imagine 185 for sponsoring this event every month, Bob Evans for sponsoring our food, and most of all, Pete Jones for coming to speak today. We are so excited to have him. Teresa is sad she had to miss it today, but I'll be filling in for her doing a little introduction for Pete. I'm sure all of you know Pete and Susie. They are such great community leaders here in Wabash. So today Pete Jones is going to be telling you 6 stories of Wabash you may not know. Take it away,
very
Pete.
good. Now, if you came expecting to hear a scholarly, organized presentation, that is not going to happen. If that was your desire and you want to leave, give you 30 seconds to leave. But what I want to do today is tell some stories about Wabash. Stories that some are sad, some are funny, some are important, and some aren't important at all. But any small town is filled with good stories. We drive around this part of Indiana, and at the entrance to so many towns, there are signs that refer to the historic downtown. Well, every little town has a historic downtown. Ours is no exception. The stories that I want to tell today, I have found mostly in the old newspapers, a very rich source of material for local historians. And as these newspapers dwindle away, I don't know what local historians are going to do for information. If you've ever sat in the library before the microfilm machines and looked at old newspapers, you very quickly become lost in that, and time goes by so quickly under those circumstances. I'll mention a lot of names today. Sometimes you have to bend the rules just a little and talk about people who were not involved in Wabash County, but if you dig deeply enough, there is a connection. I can remember years ago, there was a magazine called Saturday Review of Literature. It was a wonderful little magazine. Came out, as you would guess, every Saturday, edited by a man named Norman Cousins. And in the early 60s, I opened my copy of that magazine, and there on one page, I found the names of 3 people connected with Wabash County. Now, one, of course, was Gene Stratton Porter, whose books sold by the millions. Another name was Lloyd C. Douglas, whose books sold by the millions. And the other was a man whose name is almost obscure today, Ed Howe. All 3 on one page in the Saturday Review.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, we're waking you up already. Yeah, good. Now, you're fully aware of Gene Stratton Porter, so we won't dwell on her. Lloyd C. Douglas is different. Lloyd C. Douglas did not begin to write until he was about 50 years of age. And he is the author of The Robe Magnificent Obsession, and other novels. And he preached for a year or two in North Manchester. He was born in Columbia City, went to school in Ohio, and then his first pulpit was in North Manchester. So we've bent the rules a little there. I don't know that Wabash County affected anything that he ever wrote. Ed Howe was a little different. Ed Howe was born in Treaty. He lived in this county only 4 years. So maybe I'm cheating when I want to work him in. But he was the son of an itinerant Methodist minister. And the family soon moved from Treaty to Missouri. Ed Howe eventually became one of the best known journalists in America, but his name is known by almost nobody today. He was a very popular newspaper editor, a humorist. His newspaper columns ran across the country, and eventually he produced a special edition of his newspaper out in Atchison, Kansas, the Atchison Globe, a weekly edition which he circulated really across the country. He came back here only once, and he was on his way between St. Louis and Detroit, so he came on the Wabash Railroad. And he wrote afterwards, he said, when the train stopped in Wabash, I got out and stood on the station platform and looked to the south because that's where my birthplace was. And he said, I have no real memory of that, but I just wanted to look in that direction. Anyway, Ed Howe was a remarkable journalist. He lived somewhat under the shadow of another newspaper editor out in Kansas. That was William Allen White, who ran a tremendous newspaper in the little town of Emporia, Kansas. So if you look deeply enough, you can find Wabash connections. Another that I want to mention is Ross Lockridge and his son, Ross Lockridge Jr. Here we have to bend a little too, because Ross Lockridge Sr. was born in Miami County, just west of Rowan, right over the line. And he was interested in history. He taught eventually at Indiana University. He was a graduate of Rowan High School. He came a mile or so to the east to go to Rowan High School. He was he was literarily inclined, wrote a couple of history books about Indiana. His brother, sadly, was killed in a track meet of all things. His brother was hit. You know, they had an event called the javelin throw, and his brother was hit by a javelin and killed. The funeral was in Rowan, and William Lowell Bryan, who was president of Indiana at that time, Indiana University, came to Rowan for that funeral. So there was a strong connection between the Lockridge family. Now, the real star of the Lockridge family, though, was Ross Lockridge Jr., born in Bloomington, Indiana in 1914. And at the age of 34, he published his first and only novel. You may remember, you may have heard, or you may have read Raintree County. Raintree County was published in 1948. And it received tremendous reviews. Houghton Mifflin, the publisher, was cautious about it. They printed, the first edition was 50,000 books. It sold out the first day because of the anticipation. It's a huge novel, runs a bit more than 1,000 pages, and it is a challenge to read. I don't read much fiction, and I cannot claim to have finished that book. I started it one time, bogged down in it, and never picked it up again. But Ross Lockridge Jr., he made the cover of Life magazine in 1948. His book was the main selection of the old Book of the Month Club, if you remember that. And he, as a student at Indiana University, Ross Lockridge Jr. had achieved the highest academic rating ever. 4 years, straight A's. Tough to beat. Impossible to beat, I guess. You could tie it. I don't know that it has been tied. But he was living at the top of the world in 1948. The book was published early in 1948. And we'll get to Wabash County connection in a minute here, but stay with me in Bloomington here. He had everything going for him. And in March, about 3 months after the book had been published, it was a chilly evening, and Lockridge Jr. had been at an event on the campus at IU. He came home, put the car in the garage, no overhead opening doors at that time. He had to get out and deliberately closed the door. He got back in the car. There was an IU basketball game on the radio. And some people believe he got back in the car to hear the completion of that game. He died in that car, carbon monoxide. The coroner's ruling was suicide. Hard to believe. But finally, we get to the Wabash County connection on this. Because remember, Ross Lockridge, his father was born just west of Rowan. And as a boy, Ross Lockridge Jr. would go swimming in Lucan's Lake. Well, there's a lake that plays an important part in that novel. And those are his memories of Lucan's Lake. He also remembered visiting the Wabash County Courthouse with his father. And in the book, he describes the interior of the Wabash County Courthouse. So there is a connection there. Let's talk about the courthouse for a minute. That has many connections with local history, with Wabash history. The most exciting event at the courthouse, of course, was the lighting of those first arc lamps. What do you imagine the second most important or exciting event was? Well, there was an elaborate privy just to the southwest of the building, very fancy privy. As my grandfather would have said, a 6-holder privy. There was an explosion in that privy. That's the second most exciting thing. Gases collect in privies. Probably somebody was in there, flipped a cigarette or something, and out came part of the side of that very, very fancy privy. And while we're at the courthouse, let's talk about another thing nearby. The Lincoln statue. I'm amazed at the number of people in this town who have never stopped to get out and look at that. You can't tell anything about that when you drive down the hill. You glance over there and there's Lincoln. But if you have not done this, get out of your car, walk around that statue, stand in front of it and look at it. And think about the sculptor of that, a man named Charles Keck. Keck was an important sculptor in America in the mid 1930s. He was commissioned to do that statue by a man who had grown up in Wabash, Alexander New, N-E-W, Alexander New, who in the 1920s became the head of a chain of department stores. And he was a very wealthy man. He commissioned that statue. He chose Keck above a number of other sculptors, including one who lost out on this was Goodson Borglum, the sculptor of Mount Rushmore. Now, if Borglum had done that statue, it would be much better known. Keck was important, but not nearly as well known as Borglum. The statue, which was a gift to the city in memory of Alexander New's parents, Isaac New and Henrietta New, they had a clothing store on Market Street. No, I'm sorry, it was over. Well, maybe it was on Market Street. You have to forgive me here. The statue, dedicated in 1931, cost $75,000. I put that on a couple of different sites on the internet that will tell you the appreciation of money over the inflation. One site came back with a figure of $1,200,000. Another site a little higher than that. But at any rate, we're looking at a statue that would be worth $1 million today or more. So someday when you're there, take a look at that. It's a magnificent piece of art. Lincoln's eyes are downcast. His hands are very visible, and he is seated on a rock. Keck made a working model, a maquette of that statue, one that I wish they had chosen because it shows Lincoln's tall hat on the ground beside him. Just a whimsical little touch that would have added so much, I think, to that statue. Now, beside the Lincoln statue, just to the north of where the statue sits today, was one of two town pumps in this place, in this town. The county commissioners in about 1900 commissioned the drilling of a well there. And I'm amazed that well reached the depth of 1,032 feet. I can't imagine that. They were looking for artesian water. They were looking for water that they didn't have to pump, but they never found it. But they did find water, but it was not artesian. So the town pump sat there on that site until just before the statue was put there. The other town pump was on Market Street, where you might remember the J.C. Penney store was. That was also Harder's Opera House, which we'll talk about that in a minute or two, because Harder's Opera House was on the second floor of that building. What am I doing where we get feedback? Okay. Oh, is that scratching? I'm sorry. Let's see if that's any better. Go again. Well, anyway, do stop and look at that statue. It was reworked a number of years ago by Richard Ford, who did it kind of behind the scenes. But and Susie and I have seen the working model of that statue, the one with the top hat on the ground. It's at the Lincoln Cottage in Washington, D.C., a place about 3 miles from the White House at a higher elevation. And Lincoln would go there in the summertime in an effort to escape the heat of the city. But you walk in the front door of that building and there is Charles Jack's working model. One of the things that I find as I drive around Wabash, there are certain spots that so help me, I envision what was there before. There was a great flood here in the 1840s. We don't know much about that flood, but it may have been a more significant flood than the one in 1913. And there was a canal lock behind the Plain Dealer building, which is now, what is that building used for now?
Lighthouse Mission.
Oh, yeah. And anyway, there was one of the canal locks was behind there. Well, during that flood, there were some people trapped in their houses, and they took a canal boat out of that lock, and they ran it down Market Street, ran it down Canal Street, and took those people from their homes. So, as old as I am, I wasn't there now. I wasn't there then. But I see that in my mind's eye. I go past Larry Thrush's law office, the northeast corner of Hill and Wabash. And I see Teddy Roosevelt because he spoke on that site in about 1901. And I don't see Larry Thrush's law office. I see a hastily built speaker's platform, and I see Teddy Roosevelt. When Teddy Roosevelt spoke there, a delegation from the hat factory, the Pioneer Hat Factory was where Ford Meter Box is today. A delegation from the Pioneer Hat Factory came and presented Teddy with a hat. And he liked that hat, and he wore it because there are newspaper pictures from Minneapolis and from Fargo, North Dakota, showing Teddy Roosevelt on that same campaign trip with that hat on. So a little bit of Wabash County went with him. I can take you to the Presbyterian Church here. And if we go in and it's very quiet and we sit there, we can hear Hoagie Carmichael's band. Really, I'm convinced. I'm convinced of that. Hoagie Carmichael brought his band, the Indiana Collegians. He brought his band up here from Bloomington in 1924, along with the IU Glee Club, and they did a program in the Presbyterian Church. 3 or 4 days prior to that program, there was an ad in the Plain Dealer. Come to the Presbyterian Church and hear a red-hot jazz band. And now this is circumstantial evidence. I can't prove this. We do know that Hoagie was there. And that same week in Bloomington, a man who became Hoagie Carmichael's best friend, a man named Vic Spiderbeck, was in Bloomington. And I cannot imagine that Hoagie Carmichael would have left Vic Spiderbeck behind in Bloomington to come to Wabash. So I think that Vic Spiderbeck, who was probably the best cornet player in all the world, was with him. So maybe if you come sit in that church with me on a quiet day, maybe we can hear Vic Spiderbeck too. When that concert was over, Carmichael and his band And half the people who turned out that night came down the hill. They went to the building right across the street here. They went up on the second floor where there were lodge rooms, and they played until 3 o'clock in the morning. I wouldn't have stayed up that late. I can't hear them if I go over there, but I can hear them up in the Presbyterian Church. I think two of the famous people who have come to this town. Oh, by the way, when I was doing I did a column for the Plain Dealer for 17 or 18 years. And I got a letter from a man over in Huntington County who was reading that column, and he was a little upset. And he said, "You write about all these other people. You have never written about a president who came to Wabash." Well, I couldn't. No sitting president ever came to Wabash. There were several who came here before they were president. There were some who came here after they were president, but no sitting president ever came here. I can hear Hoagie Carmichael in the Presbyterian Church, but I can't imagine a sitting president in Wabash. But here are some of the people who have been here. Some you may not remember. Helen Keller was here. She spoke at a Chautauqua meeting in City Park. We'll talk about Chautauqua in a minute too. But she and Ann Sullivan were here. Benjamin Harrison was here after he was president. Luther Burbank, you remember Luther Burbank? Can't say it now. Luther Burbank, who was very famous in the 1920s, experimenting with plants and with crops. He spoke at Chautauqua. James Whitcomb Riley, the poet, came several times, again, at Harder's Opera House down the street here. He came to Rowan one time. Now, if you like Riley, and if you remember his poems, particularly if you remember them from childhood, you are not going to want to hear what I have to say. So you can plug your ears if you wish. But an organization in Rowan hired him, paid him $100 to come up from Indianapolis. He came by train, probably first to Logansport and then on the old Vandalia Railroad that ran through Rowan. When he got off the train, he was drunk. Way, way, way too much to drink. And there was no chance that they could get him sobered up in time to go on the platform. So they put him back on the next train that came through, sent him back toward Indianapolis. But the problem was they'd already given him in advance the $100. And they had an awful time getting that $100 back. Now, you can unplug your ears if you didn't want to hear that. People are mistaken about one thing about Riley. He wrote one of his poems was called Amongst the Hills of Somerset. Well, you know, Riley, as a young man, before his poetry began to pay off, he was a sign painter. And we do know that he traveled through Wabash County painting advertising signs. But the hills of Somerset, it is not about hills out around Somerset, Indiana. It's about a similar area in eastern Pennsylvania. Now, if you have friends in Somerset, don't tell them what I just said. Eva Tangway was here. Eva Tangway was maybe the original Energizer Bunny. She was a burlesque star, and she played the Eagles Theater at least twice. Her jokes were risque by the standards of the day. When she came on stage, she showed a lot of skin, And one time she was here, the city council canceled its meeting scheduled for that night. The excuse was, we don't have enough business to make a meeting worthwhile. The real reason was all 7 councilmen showed up at the Eagles Theater. But yeah, Evil was in, John Philip Sousa, his band was here at least 3 times, twice in the Eagles Theater, once in Harder's Opera House. Probably the best known of the current people then was William Jennings Bryan, the silver-tongued orator of the Platte. And he was here in Wabash. I have found that he was here at least 4 times. He spoke a couple of times at the Chautauqua in the park. Once when he came here, it was a stop only to see a friend. He had no speaking schedules. And he came here in the summer of 1920 to see a friend of his, a man named Ed Eikenberry, who was an attorney here. And he came on the Big 4 Railroad right down the street this way, and Ed wasn't there. So William Jennings Bryan, probably the best known person in America in 1920, really, wandered the streets here for 30 minutes and nobody recognized him. But you wouldn't have expected to meet William Jennings Bryan on the streets of Wabash in 1920. He no doubt stopped to watch the finishing of the construction of the Hotel Indiana, the Charlie Creek Inn today, because that hotel opened that summer. So, and that's another person I see walking. I really do. I see William Jennings. He would have come past this building. He would have come right out here in front because the station was down here. And to get to the downtown, he would have had to have come back here. He was scheduled to speak at Chautauqua a couple of years earlier, and his train was late. And according to the plane dealer, some 3,000 people waited at City Park until 11:30 at night to hear him. So he was a compelling speaker. Probably the most important person ever to come to Wabash came here before it was even a town. That would have been Lewis Cass, who took part in the Treaty of Paradise Spring. He lived in one of the cabins there for some 3 weeks, supervising that treaty. And I have to look at the list here because Lewis Cass, at that time, was territorial governor of Michigan. But throughout his life, he held different positions, particularly at the federal level. He started out life as a politician as a representative in the House of Representatives in Ohio, state of Ohio. But he became U.S. Senator. He was the U.S. Secretary of State. He was the ambassador to France. He was the governor of Michigan Territory and then of the state of Michigan. And he was the U.S. Secretary of War. Now, I don't think there was ever a more important person here, but we weren't even a town yet. So can we count it? I don't know. And believe it or not, he's another man I see. If I go to Paradise Springs, I'm convinced I see Lewis Cass. Sad thing is, have you ever stopped to look at the monument that is at Paradise Spring, dedicated in 1916? I think so, 1916. On that monument is a list of the participants in that treaty. They misspelled Lou's first name. They gave it the French spelling, and he spelled his name Lewis. It's Louis on that treaty. I'm looking for somebody brave enough to go down there and with a chisel and a hammer sometime and change that. Another Wabash person who is almost forgotten today would be Ole Olson, Johnny Olson. You recognize that name? It's not surprising if you don't. Ole Olson was born in Peru. We're going to steal him, okay? He was born in Peru. But as he said one time, he said, I came to Wabash as soon as I heard about it. Well, he did, as a matter of fact. His parents moved to Wabash when Johnny Olson was just a year old. He lived on the south side, went to Wabash High School, didn't finish high school because he was stage struck. And he left Wabash at the age of 17, went to Northwestern University and enrolled there. There he met a man named Johnson, Chick Johnson, and they became instant buddies. And they were both interested in music, they were interested in comedy, and they formed a team known as Olson and Johnson. Olson and Johnson became one of the top bills in vaudeville. And they bridged the gap. Not only were they successful in vaudeville, but when vaudeville faded, they took their show to Broadway. And their most famous production was Hellzapoppin'. And it ran for more than 2,000 performances and was the record on Broadway until Oklahoma came in the 1940s. But they were a zany group. They loved jokes, corny or not. Their routines on stage were interrupted constantly, planned interruptions. And they were a sensational duo. And they had a radio show for a while. They had one of the early television shows, Olson and Johnson did. They died within a year of each other, and they are buried side by side in Reno, Nevada, or maybe it's Las Vegas, where they are buried. They had a daughter. Oh gosh, I've dropped her name. Just a minute. Well, I can't come up with. Anyway, the daughter married a man from Hannibal, Missouri, named Bill Lear. Bill Lear became famous for the Lear jet. And Johnny Olson's daughter and Bill Lear had a daughter. They named her Shanda. Chandelier. Now that's Johnny Olson's influence coming out. I'm convinced of that. Did you know we had a golf course out on Harrison Avenue? There was a golf course on Harrison Avenue. Harrison Avenue was on the south side of that golf course. Wabash Street was on the west side, and Inez Street on the east side. And there was a clubhouse back there, an old farmhouse. And Mark Honeywell was involved in creating that golf course. It opened in about 1914, give or take a year. And they hired a professional who had just come from Scotland. He was fresh off the boat. And he came to Wabash, I'm convinced, at Mark Honeywell's invitation. And his name was Sir Walker. He was a little man, weighed 118 pounds, and yet he could drive tremendously. He could send that ball far, far away. Sir Walker won the Indiana Open in 1916, probably the second year that he was here. And then he left Wabash, and I don't know where he went from there. Don't know where he took up his next job. But in 1924, Sir Walker won the US Open. He beat Bobby Jones by 3 strokes. So I think we ought to claim him. I'd like to claim him. Walker was a very deliberate player. He played very slowly. In fact, he irritated his opponents because it took so much time. And I think that was a part of the scheme. I think it was his way of unnerving his opponents. But his success didn't last very long. He was a heavy drinker. And Sir Walker, in the last years of his life, he was reduced to being a caddy at a golf course in Miami, Florida. He came north a year or two later, and on a cold summer evening, chilly, rainy, he died in a jail cell in New Jersey. He had gone into a police station and asked for shelter, and they had a holding cell there, and they said, well, you can sleep in there. And Sir Walker died during the night. The golf course that I'm referring to was very popular in this town. And it was laid out in such a, there was a church over on the west side of that golf course. And it was placed too near to a tee. And so several windows in that church were broken every summer. And but in a great spirit of cooperation, the congregation would throw a dinner for the golf players, and the golf players would settle up for the broken windows that night. So the lovely spirit. And but that course closed down in about 1943. You know, young men in this town had disappeared. They were in the service, and there were all sorts of restrictions. I was 8 and 9 years old during that stretch, and you know, we didn't play cowboys and Indians. We played war. And we would go out there on that golf course because the sand traps made excellent fox holes. And there was also a great place to fly kites, you know. Do you remember the Civil War cannons that were in front of Memorial Hall? Well, there were 2 Civil War cannons in front of Memorial Hall. There was another cannon, a World War I cannon, behind Memorial Hall, where the addition to Memorial Hall sits today. And during the early part of World War II, the government took all but one of those cannons. They needed it. They melted down a lot of, you know, every courthouse square had a Civil War cannon or 2. Again, at the age of 8 or 9, I would walk past there, and I would sometimes find a walnut or something nearby, and I'd pop that down breech of that cannon. What I could never figure out, though, one of those cannons was pointed squarely at Lena Ramey's house. And I thought, what in the world has Lena Ramey done to ruin this? Well, you go up there today, they moved the cannon. They left one cannon. They took two of them. They left one. And it's been moved a little bit. So Lena Ramey's house is no longer in danger, and I'm glad to know that. But the fascinating thing to me is that those two Civil War cannons were brought here all the way from Fort Jefferson, which is in the Dry Tortuga, and I cannot pronounce this, folks, but it's the Dry Tortuga Islands in the Gulf of Mexico. Couldn't they have found Civil War cannons closer? Why did they haul them all the way from there? I don't know. How am I doing on time?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
Courthouse.
All right. I'll go back to the courthouse with me. One of the great sights in this town, to me, the Christmas lights that we'll see just before Thanksgiving. Those lights are wonderful. They've different decorations have been on the courthouse over the years, and the ones that we see today, the strings there from the tower, probably date from, that idea dates from about 1938 or 1939. I can't, Susie will verify that I have to drive down to the courthouse 2 or 3 times during the time that I just like to sit and look at those. And boy, don't they look nice coming down the cut. Have you ever seen them coming through the cut? That is spectacular. Well, let's see what else I've got here. Oh, Harder's Opera House. Second floor of the building that housed J.C. Penney. We were up in that building, 10 or 12 years ago. You could still see the proscenium of the theater that was up there. It lasted until the Eagles Theater was built, and the Eagles clearly overshadowed Harder's Opera House. But like so many opera houses, and there was never an opera there. They called them opera houses, but there was never an opera. All sorts of other performances, like Eva Tangway. But for some reason, they seemed always to be on the second floor of buildings. The Dixon brothers here in town eventually bought that building. The Dixons had the movie houses in Wabash, and they took over Harder's Opera House, and they no sooner had bought the building than the back wall collapsed into the alley. There was a lawsuit. I honestly don't know how the lawsuit came out, but here they had just bought the opera house, and the opera house began to fall apart. They also owned the Colonial Theater, which was where Marge Francis' dress shop is today. And they had there was a theater, there was a movie in this building at one time too, but it was not owned by the Dixons. Two great mysteries that I want to share with you. I won't say that these keep me awake at night, but I do wonder from time to time about this. One of them involves a man named, oh, wait a minute, let me talk about Asa Smith. I'll save the mysteries for later. Asa Smith. Asa Smith was an attorney born here. I don't think he ever practiced law here, but a man who was as tough as nails, physically and mentally. And in the 1920s, he was the family attorney for an Oberholzer family in Indianapolis, in the Irvington area in Indianapolis. And Marge Oberholzer became a friend of D.C. Stevenson. Now, D.C. Stevenson was the grand dragon of the Indiana clan. And D.C. Stevenson took Marge to Chicago on the Monon Railroad, and he raped her on that train. She got off the train in Hammond, went into a drugstore. You could buy poisons of different types, believe it or not, in those years. She bought a poisonous substance, took it, and became very, very, very ill. Stevenson's henchman dropped Marge off, literally dumped her on the front porch, as I understand it, at the family home there in the Irvington area. And their attorney was Asa Smith. So what did they do? They called Asa. What do we do? Here's the deal. He came out to the house and he took what became a deathbed statement from Marge Oberholzer. And somehow, well, Marge eventually died. And there was a trial in Noblesville. The trial was venued from Marion County up to Noblesville. And Asa Smith somehow got that deathbed statement admitted as evidence. Now, that was a pretty tough thing to do. And D.C. Stevenson was convicted of, I guess, manslaughter, maybe was what they finally arrived at. Anyway, he is sent off to state prison, and the Klan falls apart. Now here's Asa Smith, man from Wabash, who broke the Klan. Now, my wife doesn't like for me to tell this story the way it unfolded, but I'm going to anyway. Asa Smith was a good friend of my grandfather. And Asa had been, he was an ex-Marine, by the way. He'd been in the Marines in both World War I and World War II. And he got out of the Marines just before the war was over. So it's the summer of 1945. I'm 10 years old in the summer of 1945, and I'm at my grandfather's house. And my grandfather is out in the garden behind the house. Now here's this 10-year-old guy, and somebody hammers on the front door. And I went to the front door, and this man is standing there, and I had never seen him before. And he said, "Do you have a one-eyed grandfather?" I said, "Yeah, my grandfather had a glass eye." And I said, "Yes, I have a one-eyed grandfather." He said, "Well, go tell the old son of a bitch to come in here." That's the part Susie doesn't like, but that's what Asa Smith said. Well, I'm terrified. I'm 10 years old. What in the world is this man doing? Why does he want to see my grandfather? So I went to the backyard and I said to my grandfather, "There's a man there at the front door. He's mad at you." And my grandfather, "We'll see." And when he got to the door, these two fell into each other's arms, whacking each other on the back, and so glad. I was mystified, but that's how I met Asa Smith. two mysteries. Well, I'm going to put the mysteries off again. Right? We were a town where we had lots of floods, and the one I've already alluded to, the one that happened in the 1840s. But the worst flood was the one in 1913, and then we had another big flood in 1943. And there were lots of other houses down here in the lowlands in those years. So it was really, these floods were crisis features in our town. Churches would open up to house the people who had been taken from their houses. Traffic came to a stop. In the 1913 flood, they thought they were going to lose the Big Four railroad bridge across the river. So the railroad ran coal cars out there to weight down that bridge. I've told you about the things that I see in my mind's eye around this town. One that I see is down here on Fulton Street. There's a house on Fulton Street. In the flood of 1943, I saw a woman catch a fish from her front door. To an 8-year-old, that's impressive when you can catch a fish from your front porch. And I see that woman out there. I can still see the fish flopping on the end of the line. Go down there with me sometime. I'll show you. All right. Finally, the mysteries. A man named A.F. Thrasher, a photographer in the West, Red Lodge, Montana. Deer Lodge, Montana. He is in what is now Wyoming, and it is 1872. There's a Wabash man out there with him, Doherty. Come on, I need his first name. He was had a packing house. I think Charles, yeah. Charles Doherty, wealthy man. And his doctors had advised him to go west for his health. And he runs into Thrasher. And they form a party of 6 or 8 people. And they became the first tourists into Yellowstone Park. And Thrasher took more than 1,000 pictures, glass plate negatives. They got as far, they got almost to the northern part of the park before they turned around. Anyway, Thrasher comes to Wabash with Charles Doherty. Presumably, those negatives are with him. And Thrasher stays here for a few months. The museum has some of Thrasher's local pictures. And then Thrasher goes back to the West. And nobody knows where those negatives are. What happened to those negatives? Did he leave them here? Were they tossed out by somebody who didn't know their significance? The park headquarters are in at the north entrance to Yellowstone, Mammoth. They're up at Mammoth. And we stopped in there one time. The park historian's office is there. And I went into that office and I said, I'm from Wabash, Indiana. And the man practically jumped out of his chair and he said, Thrasher's pictures. And I said, yeah, I'm looking for him. So are we, he said. Okay, now that's one mystery. Where are Thrasher's pictures? Are they still here under the floorboards of somebody's attic? Where might they be? Or were they tossed out? Here's another mystery. 1886, February the 4th of 1886. And a young man, 30-some years old, David Starr Jordan. David Starr Jordan, at that moment, was the president of Indiana University. I think he was 34. Very, very young to be the president of a college like that. And David Starr Jordan is one of the best known scientists in America. He was an ichthyologist. He studied fish. And he would have been welcome on any speaker's platform in the country and in Western Europe. He was that important. He was that prominent. He came to Wabash County on February the 4th, 1886, to Dora, Indiana. The town's no longer there, you know. We lost it with one of the reservoirs. He comes up there in the dead of winter, and it was a tough winter. The roads are dirt roads, and you know what happens to dirt roads in the wintertime. Why did he come? Well, they wanted him to speak. They were raising funds for the school library. How did they latch on to this man? How did they entice David Starr Jordan to come to Dora, Indiana, to raise money for a school library, which he did, by the way. He raised $7.58. Who invited him? Who convinced him? Why did he come? Where did he stay? How did he get there? I know what he talked about. He had climbed the Pyrenees. Come on, in Switzerland. He climbed. Thank you. He had climbed the Matterhorn about 4 years before, and that's what he talked about out at Dora. $7.58 worth. Why did he come? Can you help me with that? Can you find Thrasher's photographs? I'll sleep better at night if you do. Do you have questions?
So they never printed those? They lost the negatives, but they were never printed either?
They're gone. Yeah, they were glass, you know. But,
You might mention where David Starr Jordan went.
oh, David Starr, yeah. David Starr Jordan left Indiana University. Leland Stanford had just organized what became Stanford University. And he wanted David Starr Jordan to be the president, the founding president of Stanford. And David Starr Jordan was very happy in Bloomington. He didn't want to go. But Leland Stanford and his wife came unannounced to Bloomington in their private railroad car, of course, parked it down on West, whatever that street is. And they came out to the campus. Nobody knew that they were coming. And they literally marched into David Starr Jordan's office and made him an offer that he couldn't refuse. So I lost this remarkable man very early. As I used to say in my classroom when I taught at Manchester High School, my kingdom for a question.
Okay, I didn't ask this question.
Now, I left my hearing aids at home. Susie will interpret.
I am ashamed to admit, because I'm a transplant, which building is the JCPenney building?
I'm sorry.
Which building is the JCPenney building now?
Well, what's there now?
They're
Yeah.
delicious.
Yeah, that's the JCPenney building.
Even
of Johnny Olson couldn't wait to get to Wabash. Ole Olson in Peru is after his name.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, same. But of course, we claim him because, as he said, I came to Wabash as soon as I heard about it, you know.
How long was he in Miami County?
How long there?
Yeah.
Less than a year.
And they named Ole Olson after him, and he was there
Yeah.
less than a year.
Yeah. Well, you see, you latch on to people like that. Yeah. I do thank you for coming. I appreciate it, and please, when you find those glass negatives, call me any time of the day or night, and I would welcome that. Thank you. And I will hang around if you do have a question and you want to ask privately.